Welcome to this video. Here we enter some very, very interesting concepts, and the concepts that we have here, if you look at the hello world statement here, there's our string, okay, that we started with in our very first video. We have some very, very powerful ways and clever things that we can do. Let's get rid of all of that and let's demonstrate some of this stuff to you. One of them, if you're thinking about input, right, and if you've got input and you're asking your person to input a string, and someone might enter a value upper or lower case, you actually have some very nice little function here. Look at this. Let's create a second string. Let's take our original string and let's call a method called upper. Okay, now I wonder if you can guess what that might do. So let's print our original string, right? And then let's print our new string, which is assigned. We're going to assign it whatever we do to s, which is the variable name for our first string, and we're going to do this function called upper. Interesting. Let's demonstrate it, then talk about the theory of it afterwards. Let's run it, and I hope we haven't made any obvious mistakes. Let's pop it in here, do it there. Can you see what it's done? That's the original string. What has it done to it? What has that upper actually done? Okay, so that's the first thing to notice. But this is a variable name. This is quite clever because the variable is actually something called an object. In the background, when you think about a string, you just think of the text. But when the program thinks about it treats this s, this variable, as more than just the data that you're storing. So remember, I gave you a picture with like a bucket, and the bucket said, you know, you store your data inside it, and that's all I offered to you. But actually, program languages are cleverer. They don't simply store data. They are what we technically call objects. And what an object is, it's not just a piece of information stored. It actually comes with a package of functions. There's one called upper. There are a whole ton of them. There's one called replace. There's one called count. There's one called split, and so on. And what these are packaged up inside the object. So it doesn't just store your data, the hello world. The reason that this code works, s.upper, is because it's packaged up with lots of functions, or what we technically call methods, and things that you can do with your string. So strings are not just bits of data. They're packaged up with really useful functions or methods. Methods is technically the correct term here, but we don't have to worry. So let's go back to the code. That s, when I created s, it looked like I just assigned it a string, but that's a string object, and the s string object has an upper function. What else does it have? I said to you that it had a replace. Let's play with it a bit, right? So let's say that it's not going to go upper. What happens if we just run? Now, if you want to know how to access these, you can see what's called the library of methods which belong to the Python string. It's called a class technically, but what the object has available to you, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pinch it straight from Matthew's slides, because he's got some there's the replace. Okay, so the replace works by giving a character in a string and then the replacement going there. So let's have a look, right? So let's replace in our hello world is, let's take hello and let's replace that with goodbye. Okay, I'm going to assign it to s2 and let's see that work. Now you can do all kinds of other clever stuff, which we'll kind of hint at here as well. So let's run it. Goodbye world. So I have two strings, and the first one, maybe I should have capitalized the G there, right? But the point here, entirely here, is that the string is not just a blob, a bit of data. Sorry, let's come back here. It isn't just that. When I introduced it in the earlier lectures, I was emphasizing one feature of it. But the variable for a string is an object. And objects store data and they manage that data. They supply you with all these methods and functions tied to that particular piece of data. Let's have a look at another one. And what I would recommend you do here is, so you've got a replace function. You can even do this. You can even reassign the same string. You can replace the original string with hello. Once you've replaced it, you can put it back into the same variable. Right, so let's just comment that one out and let's test that out, because this is a very powerful mechanism. And I'm going to play with these just to give you an indication of how to think, how to find these useful or otherwise, right? Now S has now changed to goodbye world, because I replaced the hello with goodbye, and this assignment operator means I replaced it, I popped it back into there. Okay, so if I don't want to do that, I would just give that a different variable name. So that's one thing you can do. Why don't we count? Why don't we see what else we can do? We can, there's a count function or method. So let's run the count function and see what that does. It's fairly obvious, I would hope, that a count function attached to it should be able to tell you how many characters you have. And it didn't like that because it takes one argument. Right, let's go back and have a look at the count. And here's the thing, right? So I've used it incorrectly. It isn't the same as the length, which is how I interpreted it straight away. You have to tell it which character you're counting. So let's count. Which character should we go for? Should we go for the E? Let's see how many E's we have. Right? And I mean, my method here in this video is deliberately to approach this in a form of experimentation to encourage that attitude in you. There's only one E. Is that right? Do you agree with that? Have a look at it. Well, it is. Only the word goodbye has an E in it. How many O's do we have? Because remember, we're replacing it and then we're counting. So what do you think your answer is to that? Not zeros, O's. What do you think it is? Well, in hello world, there's only 2. But if you have goodbye world, it's 1, 2, 3. What do you think the answer is? Have a look at the code. Right, it's going to replace it first, and then it's going to count how many O's I have. So what do you reckon? 3. If you guess 2, look at the replace statement first. So you have a count method. You have perhaps the most powerful one is called a split function. And split functions, if I just refer you quickly to Matthew's notes here, is that it will create a list, effectively a list of terms splitting on the empty space. Let's test that out, right? So what we're going to do is create S2, and we're going to say to S split. And we're not going to tell it what to split on. When you don't give it anything to say split it on the comma or split it on the zeros or split it on the spaces, it will always use the space, right? Then we're going to actually print S2. Now, not SS2, S2. Now here's a question for you. Let's get rid of the replace for the time being. Let's cut that out to keep it nice and simple. If I'm going to split that on the space, I would expect hello and world to be 2 separate items. Now, let's see what happens, how it works and what it does when I run this line of code. It's a very powerful mechanism and actually very commonly used. Tons and tons of programming exercises use it. Do you notice that when I print S2, it's got a square bracket, it's got a comma, and it's separated the 2 terms out. It's turned it into a list. In splitting it, I did a very, very interesting thing, and I want to just linger on that for a second. Right, so originally, let's go back to my original hello world statement. There it was back there, right? It itself was made up of a whole bunch of characters. But when I ran split on it, and I stored that in S2, S2 is now a list. It's actually this. This is what it actually has given me. Hello world. And it split it on the gap. So I've ended up with actually 2 strings. You say, 2 strings? What are you talking about? That's, what do you mean it's a list? Well, look, if that's a list, that's at index position 0. The first one's shifted up so you can see it. That's at index position 1. So if I'm right and it's turned it into a list, I should just be able to access that one and then separately access that one, right? In the way we've done before. Let's test that out. Let's create a loop, right? Inside here. And for S2, which might be better if I just called it LS2 for list string or string list, right? But it doesn't matter. We'll call it S2. See if you can follow me. For what we're going to do is we're going to say use the variable item in S2. Now, what is that going to do? If S2 is a list, as I'm claiming, then if S2 is a list, then it should give me hello and world as 2 separate outputs. Let's print. Let's print the item, whatever the item is that it pulls out from that, and run it and see what happens. Now the word item might confuse you, so I do apologize. Okay, let's run it. There we go. Now that's printing hello world as a list because it's just one term. Let's get rid of that for a second. But do you notice, let's run it again. And I'll stop this video in a moment and suggest to you when you go back through the exercises that you do play with this. There we go. Each word is now a separate string. It gets very, very powerful. If you're thinking to yourself, this can spiral out of control, I would say to you, absolutely it can, because you can treat the hello as a separate string, pull out individual characters, manipulate it. You can also then treat the world as a separate string. How would you do that? Well, if S2 is a list, I can simply reassign a new variable to go to S2 square bracket 0. What do you think S3 is going to store? String number 3. Any idea? Look at the code. If it's S2, which is and it's 0, is it going to just store the word hello? Should we just test that? Let's comment this out so we don't get in the way and keep it nice and simple, right? And let's print S3. And apologies for this use of really rubbish names. That's my fault because I'm trying to be efficient and save time typing long names. What do we predict S3 is going to display? Let's have some suggestions. Got your ideas? Let's run it. The word hello. Let's try from S2, let's take 1. What do we expect it to do? Remember, this is the string that's been split, and in the split parts, each it's turned it into a list of those 2 parts. Right, so let's run that again. What do we reckon? The world. So now we've split up a complex long string along the lines of the space. Of course, you can specify values in here if you have a string which has commas in it, and then we get into very, very important pieces of code. If you imagine you have some data you're passing in, right? Let me just give you an example of something that you might actually find more relevant. Look at this string here. Now let's say that you have read from a file and the first line of the file is actually that string. And what you need to do is you need to take each of the items and do different things. You don't split it just like that. You would split it on the comma, right? It's called a comma separated line. Let's just call this, we'll call this string list. Okay, just to make this absolutely clear, let's get rid of all of that. And what you can now do, let's get rid of this, is you can take each value and you can assign it to different things, you can manipulate it, you can do all kinds of stuff. So when you are looking at the power of Python, this is an example of where Python becomes very, very powerful. I'm going to very lazily just create a loop, and as we know, I should just be able to do that, and I should just be able to print I. What do we expect that to display? especially if I type that as string, not string, it should take each item separately and the commas should disappear. Right, just run that, make sure I haven't made any typos, and run it. And it didn't like it. What didn't it like? String list. Oh, can you see where the problem is? Look at the error, and it's always useful to spot errors. It's a name error. The name string list is not defined. What's the difference? It's capital here, and it's not capital there. Generally, the best way, if you're using a variable, is to double click it, Control C, double click it, Control V. Or if you've got an Apple, Command C, Command V, it always guarantees your variable names are consistent. Otherwise, you have these simple typo errors, right? I'm going to stop in a minute, and we're just going to see what the output is. And what it's done is it's taken quite a complex piece of data which you might have output from a spreadsheet. You can output comma-separated files from you've read it in through a file. That's the first line of a file, and then you want to split it because you're going to do different things in your program based on the values 0 and 0. Now, if you think that's strange, I have in the Java second year for computer scientists, I create a Java program doing exactly that. So Python is very, very useful when it comes to this type of thing.